My name is Jasmine, and at 32 years old, I never expected to walk into a crime scene disguised as my childhood home. I found my grandfather freezing to death in the basement, while my parents and sister sipped cocktails on a luxury Caribbean cruise. They left a note on the granite counter that simply read, "You take care of him." They thought he was too weak to talk. They thought his mind was gone. But when I found him shivering in the dark, he whispered 5 words that changed everything. Help me get my revenge. Before I tell you how we destroyed them, please like and subscribe if you believe family is about love and not just blood. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been the one left to pick up the pieces. The blizzard outside was nothing compared to the chill waiting for me inside. My flight from Chicago to Boston had been grounded due to the nor'easter, so I had driven 6 hours in a rental car, white-knuckling the steering wheel through blinding snow. I just wanted to see my grandfather Elijah. He was the only reason I still claimed this family. At 78, he was a giant of a man, or at least he used to be before the stroke limited his mobility. My father Darnell and my mother Vanessa had promised me they were taking excellent care of him. They sent me photos of him smiling in the sunroom. They told me they had hired a private nurse. I pulled my rental car up to the brownstone in Beacon Hill. The house was a monstrosity of old money aesthetics that my parents barely afforded to maintain. The windows were dark. That was the first warning sign. It was Christmas Eve, and usually my mother insisted on having the electric candles in every window to show off to the neighbors. Today the house looked like a tomb. I grabbed my bag and ran up the steps fighting the wind. I used my key, but the deadbolt was engaged. I rang the bell. No answer. I rang again, pounding on the heavy oak door. Silence. Panic started to prick at the back of my neck. I remembered the spare key hidden inside the planter urn by the door, a security risk I had warned my father about a dozen times. I dug through the frozen soil and found it. My fingers were numb as I jammed it into the lock and twisted. The door groaned open. I stepped inside expecting the rush of central heating. Instead, I could see my own breath. The air inside was stale and freezing, colder than a meat locker. I checked the thermostat in the hallway. It was set to off. The internal temperature read 40 degrees. My heels clicked loudly on the hardwood floor, echoing through the empty house. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the cavernous foyer. "Mom, Dad, Chantel." No answer. I walked into the kitchen. The remodeling they had done last year cost more than my college tuition. Marble countertops imported from Italy, custom cabinetry, and a refrigerator that cost more than a car. And there, sitting right in the middle of the pristine kitchen island, was a piece of heavy cream cardstock. My mother's handwriting. Jasmine. We decided to take a last-minute trip to St. Bart's. We need the sun, and the stress has been too much for your father. Since you are coming home anyway, you can watch Grandpa. There is soup in the pantry. See you in 10 days. I stared at the note. They left. They actually left. They left a stroke survivor alone in a freezing house in the middle of a blizzard. Rage, hot and blinding, flared in my chest. I pulled out my phone, ready to scream at my father, but I stopped. The silence of the house was wrong. Where was Grandpa? I ran to the first-floor master suite. This was where they told me he was staying. They said they gave him the best room in the house because he could not climb stairs. I threw open the double doors. The room was immaculate. The bed was made with military precision. The pillows were fluffed. It looked like a showroom, not a bedroom. There was no smell of medicine, no medical equipment, no half-drunk glasses of water. He had not been sleeping here. Fear replaced the rage. I ran back into the hallway. "Grandpa?" I screamed. I checked the guest rooms. Empty. I checked the living room. Empty. Then I saw it. The door to the unfinished basement suite. It was a project my father had started 5 years ago, promising to turn it into a rental unit, but never finished because he ran out of money. The door was shut tight. I ran to it and grabbed the handle. locked from the outside. My heart hammered against my ribs. I unlocked it and threw the door open. A smell hit me instantly. The smell of mildew, unwashed sheets, and human waste. It was the smell of neglect. Grandpa. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. They had cut the power to the basement. I turned on my phone flashlight and descended the wooden stairs. The temperature down here was even lower. It felt like walking into a grave. The beam of my light swept across the concrete floor. Piles of lumber, insulation rolls, and in the corner a small cot set up against the drafty brick wall. There was a lump under a thin gray blanket. I sprinted across the room, dropping to my knees beside the cot. Grandpa, Grandpa, please wake up. I pulled back the blanket. He was curled into a fetal position, wearing only thin cotton pajamas. His skin was gray, his lips blue. He was shivering so violently his teeth were chattering. Beside the bed on a cardboard box was a bowl of congealed oatmeal that looked days old and a sippy cup of frozen water. "Oh my God," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I ripped off my heavy wool coat and wrapped it around him. I pulled him into my arms, trying to transfer my body heat to him. He was ice cold. His breathing was shallow and ragged. "Hang on, Grandpa," I sobbed, fumbling for my phone. "I am calling 911. We are getting you to a hospital right now." I dialed the numbers, my thumb hovering over the call button. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my wrist. I looked down. Grandpa's eyes were open. They were cloudy but focused. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man I thought was dying. He shook his head slowly. "No," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. "Do not call." "Grandpa, you are freezing. You have hypothermia," I cried. "No hospital," he whispered, urgency cutting through his weakness. "They signed a DNR, Jasmine. Do not resuscitate. If you take me in, the doctors will look at the paperwork your father filed. They will let me go. That is what they want." I froze. A DNR. My father had power of attorney. If I brought him to the hospital in this condition, unconscious or barely responsive, the doctors would follow the legal orders provided by the primary guardian. My parents had set a trap. If he died at home, it was natural causes. If he died at the hospital, it was medical protocol. Either way, they got the life insurance. "Then what do I do?" I asked, desperate, rubbing his freezing hands. "I cannot leave you here." "Get me upstairs," he wheezed. "Get the heat on, but do not let them know I am awake." He reached under the flat, dirty pillow with a trembling hand. He pulled out an old, cracked iPad, one I had given him years ago to play Sudoku. "Take this," he said. I looked at the screen. The voice memo app was open. A recording was paused. "They think I am senile," he said, a grim smile touching his blue lips. "They think I do not understand English anymore. They talk freely in front of me, Jasmine. I recorded them. I have everything." I looked at the iPad, then back at the man who had built this family's fortune from nothing, only to be discarded like trash. The sadness in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that matched the temperature of the room. "You recorded their plan?" I asked. Every word he whispered. "The cruise, the heating bill, the insurance policy, your sister laughing about my funeral." I gripped the iPad tight. "Help me up, Jasmine," he said. "We have work to do." I wrapped my arms around him, lifting his frail body. He was lighter than I remembered. I half carried, half dragged him up the stairs, away from the cold, dark hell my parents had built for him. I brought him to the living room and laid him on the expensive leather sofa, covering him with every throw blanket I could find. I cranked the thermostat to 80 degrees. As the color began to return to his cheeks, I sat on the floor beside him and pressed play on the iPad. The voice of my brother-in-law, Brad, filled the room, crisp and clear. "Why don't we just unplug the heater down there? It is going to be 10 degrees tonight. Nature will take its course, and we will be back in time to mourn." Then my mother's voice. "Just make sure the door is locked. We do not want him wandering up here and tripping the alarm. God, I need this vacation." I stopped the recording. My hand was shaking not from cold, but from fury. I looked at Grandpa. He was watching me, waiting for my reaction. "They are coming back in 10 days, I said, my voice steady. 10 days, he agreed. I stood up and looked around the house. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a battlefield. "Rest up, Grandpa," I said, walking to the kitchen to make him warm broth. "Because when they walk through that door, we are going to make them wish they had frozen to death on that cruise ship." This was not just negligence. This was attempted murder. And I was an auditor. My entire career was built on finding the truth buried in the lies. I was about to audit my own family, and the penalty was going to be everything they owned. I worked with the precision of a surgeon, even though my hands were shaking with a rage I had never felt before. I raided the kitchen pantry, finding a jar of organic honey and a kettle. I mixed the warm water with the honey, creating a simple glucose solution to bring his blood sugar up without shocking his system. I had moved him to the living room, but I kept the lights off, using only the glow of the street lamps filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. I could not risk a neighbor seeing movement and calling my parents to congratulate them on my arrival. Grandpa Elijah took the warm water in small sips. His lips were slowly turning from a terrifying shade of blue back to his natural deep brown. I wrapped another wool throw around his legs and rubbed his feet, trying to stimulate circulation. He looked at me with eyes that were tired but sharp. He was a fighter. He had built a real estate empire in Boston when banks would not even let a black man open a checking account. He was not going to let a little cold weather and a lot of betrayal take him out. "Rest now, Grandpa," I whispered, tucking the blanket under his chin. "I need to make a call." I stepped into the hallway and dialed the one number I knew I could trust. Marcus Sterling. He had been my grandfather's attorney for 40 years. He was the only person my father feared because Sterling knew where every single financial skeleton was buried. He picked up on the second ring. Sterling speaking. "Mr. Sterling, it is Jasmine. I am at the house." Jasmine. His voice softened but kept its professional edge. "You were not supposed to be back until tomorrow. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "They left him. They went on a cruise and left him in the unfinished basement with no heat and no food. He is alive, but barely." There was a silence on the other end so profound I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard the sound of keys jingling and a chair scraping back. "I am coming over," Sterling said. "Do not call the police yet. Do not call an ambulance. Just keep him warm. I will be at the service entrance in 20 minutes. I hung up and returned to the living room. Grandpa was pointing at the iPad on the coffee table. The screen was cracked but functional. It was the only weapon we had. "Play it," he rasped. "You need to hear it." I sat on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, and pressed the play button on the voice memo app. The recording was dated 2 days ago. The audio quality was surprisingly clear. I could hear the hum of the expensive refrigerator and the clinking of wine glasses. "So when do we leave?" That was Brad, my brother-in-law. His voice had that arrogant drawl that always made my skin crawl. He sounded relaxed, like he was discussing a golf game and not a murder. "Flight is at 6 in the morning, my mother Vanessa replied. "I packed the black dress just in case. You know, for the funeral. I do not want to be scrambling for an outfit when we get back." I felt bile rise in my throat. She packed a funeral dress. She was planning to mourn a man she was actively killing. "Are you sure the old man signed the papers?" Brad asked. "He signed them, my father." Darnell's voice joined the conversation. He was slurring slightly, probably on his third scotch. He did not know what he was signing. The stroke messed up his eyes. I told him it was a permission slip for a new physical therapist. It was actually the transfer of power of attorney and the DNR order. "You are a genius, Dad," Brad laughed. A distinct sound of a high five followed. "So we just turn off the breaker to the basement suite and lock the door. The weatherman says it is dropping to single digits this week." "It is humane if you think about it," my sister Chantel chimed in. Her voice was light and airy. The same voice she used to ask for money. He is suffering. We are just helping him let go. Plus, that insurance policy expires in February. If he drags this out another 6 months, we lose $2 million. $2 million. That was the price of my grandfather's life. The recording continued. I heard the sound of footsteps on hardwood, then the click of a heavy lock. "Good night," Grandpa Brad shouted mockingly. "Don't let the bedbugs bite." Laughter. They were laughing as they walked away. I stopped the recording. I felt sick, physically sick. I looked at Grandpa. Tears were streaming down his face silently. It broke me. This man who had paid for my college, who had bought Chantel her first car, who had bailed my father out of debt more times than I could count. This was how they repaid him. I wiped my own eyes. I was not going to cry. I was an auditor. I dealt in facts and consequences, and the consequences for this were going to be severe. A soft knock at the back kitchen door made me jump. I hurried to open it. Marcus Sterling stood there shaking snow off his fedora. He was a tall man in his 70s with posture as straight as a steel beam. He carried an old leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 1,000 courtrooms. "Where is he?" Sterling asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "In the living room," I said, leading the way. Sterling knelt beside the sofa. He took my grandfather's hand. They did not say a word to each other for a long moment. It was a silent communication between two men who had fought the same battles for decades. Elijah Sterling said softly, "You look like hell." "You should see the other guy," Grandpa whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. I showed Sterling the iPad. I played the key parts of the recording. The lawyer listened, his face turning into a mask of stone. He did not gasp. He did not look shocked. He just took notes on a yellow legal pad. When the recording finished, Sterling took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "This is attempted murder," he said calmly. "Conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, fraud. I can have them all in handcuffs by sunrise." "Then do it," I said, standing up. "Call the police. I want them arrested the second they step off that cruise ship." Sterling shook his head slowly. He put his glasses back on and looked at me with intense seriousness. "We cannot, Jasmine. Not yet." "Why not?" I demanded. "We have the evidence." "Because of the timing," Sterling explained patiently. "Your father holds the current power of attorney. If we call the police now, he will claim the recording was taken out of context or that Elijah is mentally incompetent and made it up. He will use the family money, your grandfather's money, to hire a defense team that will tie this up in court for years. And during that time, he will still have control over the assets. He will drain the accounts to pay for his legal defense. By the time we win, there will be nothing left." I paced the room, frustrated. "So what do? We just let them get away with it." "No," Sterling said. "We let them think they got away with it." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. "This is the Elijah Trust," Sterling said. "Currently, the primary beneficiaries are your father and your sister. You are in there, Jasmine, but with a much smaller share, because your father convinced Elijah years ago that you were successful enough and did not need the help." Grandpa nodded, shamefaced. "I believed them, Jazz. I am sorry." "It is okay, Grandpa," I said softly. "Here is the catch." Sterling continued, tapping the document. "This trust has a specific clause regarding modification. It can only be altered by the grantor, that is Elijah, during the final week of the fiscal year. That is the week between Christmas and New Year's Eve." I looked at the calendar on the wall. "Today is December 26th. "Exactly," Sterling said. "If Elijah dies before December 31st, the current will stands. Your father gets the empire. Brad gets to sell this house. Chantel gets the cash. They win." "But," I said, realizing where he was going. "But if Elijah survives until midnight on December 31st, Sterling said, a dangerous glint in his eye, "then he can sign a heavy modification amendment. He can strip them of everything. He can rewrite the entire legacy." He looked at Grandpa. "Can you hold on, Elijah?" Can you stay alive and stay hidden for 5 more days? Grandpa squeezed my hand. For the look on Darnell's face when he realizes he is broke, I could live another 20 years. Then we have a plan, Sterling said, standing up. We turn this house into a fortress. We keep the lights off. We park your rental car around the block, Jasmine. As far as the world knows, this house is empty, and Elijah is dying in the basement. And when they come back, I asked, feeling a cold thrill of anticipation. When they come back, Sterling smiled, and it was the smile of a shark. We welcome them home. We let them throw their party. We let them think they have won. And then, when the clock strikes midnight, we drop the guillotine. I looked at the iPad, then at my grandfather. 5 days. We just had to survive 5 days in the dark. I will need supplies. I said, my mind already racing through the logistics. Medical supplies, food that does not need cooking, and we need to make sure Brad's real estate friends do not get in here. Leave the legal blocks to me, Sterling said, buttoning his coat. You just keep him breathing, Jasmine. You are the firewall now. I walked Sterling to the door. The wind was howling outside, burying Boston in white. Jasmine Sterling paused at the door. You need to prepare yourself. When they come back, they are going to be cruel. They are going to treat you like dirt because they think you are powerless. You have to take it. You cannot react. You have to be the perfect victim until the moment we strike. I thought about the years of being ignored, the years of watching Chantel get everything while I worked 2 jobs in college. I thought about the cold basement and the bowl of oatmeal. Do not worry, Mr. Sterling, I said, checking the lock on the door. I have been practicing for this role my whole life. I went back to the living room. Grandpa was asleep, his breathing steady for the first time in hours. I sat in the armchair across from him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. I was not just a granddaughter anymore. I was a guard dog. And God help anyone who tried to hurt him again. The recording played in my head over and over again, fueling my resolve. $2 million. They sold his soul for $2 million. I was going to make sure they paid back every cent with interest. The peace I had cultivated for 10 days shattered at exactly 2 in the afternoon. For over a week, the house had been a silent fortress, where the only sounds were the hum of the heater I had reconnected and the quiet rasp of my grandfather breathing. We had existed in a suspended reality, just the 2 of us against the world. But then the front door crashed open, and the noise of my family filled the foyer like a sudden violent storm. They did not just enter the house, they invaded it. I stood at the top of the stairs watching them pour in. My mother, Vanessa, swept in first, wearing a white faux fur coat that probably cost more than my car, her skin glowing with a deep bronze tan that only 10 days in the Caribbean could provide. She smelled of coconut oil, an expensive duty-free perfume, a sickly sweet combination that instantly overpowered the scent of the medicinal broth I had been brewing. My father Darnell followed, struggling with 4 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases, his face flushed not from exertion, but from the lingering effects of the hotel bar. Then came my sister Chantel and her husband Brad, laughing loudly at some inside joke, neither of them looking at the house but rather looking at their reflections in the hallway mirror. They looked like a magazine cover for the perfect affluent family. They looked like people who did not have a care in the world. They certainly did not look like people who had left an elderly stroke survivor to freeze to death. My father was the first to spot me. He dropped the suitcases with a heavy thud. "Jasmine," he said. His voice was not welcoming. It was an accusation. "You are still here." I walked down the stairs slowly, my hand gripping the banister to keep from shaking. I had rehearsed this moment with Sterling a dozen times. I had to be the dutiful daughter. I had to be the doormat. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I told you I would stay until you got back." My mother pulled off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that scanned the room critically. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask if I had a safe flight. Her gaze darted instantly to the basement door. "How is he?" she asked. Her tone was casual, too casual. She was trying to sound like a concerned daughter, but I could hear the underlying tension. She was terrified of the answer. She was praying for silence. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, blocking their path to the living room. "He is alive," I said. The reaction was immediate and telling. My father's shoulders slumped, not with relief, but with disappointment. Chantel let out a heavy sigh and pulled out her phone, immediately losing interest. But it was Brad who had the most visceral reaction. He scoffed, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling as if the survival of a human being was a personal inconvenience to his schedule. "Alive," my mother repeated, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, thank God. I was so worried." She pushed past me, her heels clicking sharply on the floor, and rushed toward the basement door. I followed her. I needed to witness this performance. I needed to see how she looked him in the eye. She threw open the door and descended the stairs. "Daddy," she called out, her voice rising an octave into a theatrical falsetto. "Daddy, we are home." I stood in the doorway watching. Grandpa was lying on the cot exactly where we had staged him. We had turned the heat down just before they arrived, so the room was chilly, but not deadly. He lay still, his eyes half closed, playing his part to perfection. My mother hovered over him, but she did not touch him. She did not take his hand or smooth his hair. She stood a safe 2 feet away, wrinkling her nose at the smell of sickness and old age. "Oh, poor Daddy," she said loudly, clearly performing for the audience upstairs. "You look so frail. We missed you so much." Grandpa made a low, groaning sound, a noise of pain that made my heart ache, even though I knew he was faking. My mother turned to me, her eyes dry and hard. "Why is he still down here, Jasmine? We thought nature would have taken its course by now. We thought he would be more comfortable." "I fed him," I said simply. "I made sure he had water." Brad came down the stairs, then his heavy boots thudding on the wood. He stood next to my mother, looking down at the man who had paid for his wedding. He looked at my grandfather with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Tough old bird, isn't he?" Brad sneered. He crossed his arms over his chest, his expensive watch glinting in the dim light. "Honestly, it is impressive. He has the survival instinct of a cockroach. Nothing kills him." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands balled into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that the man lying there was worth 10 of him. I wanted to claw that arrogant smirk off his face. But I remembered Sterling's words. Let them think they won. I took a deep breath and forced my hands to relax. "He is your grandfather, Brad," I said quietly. "Show some respect." Brad laughed, a short barking sound. "Respect is earned, Jasmine. And right now he is just draining resources. Do you know how much the nursing home is going to cost if he keeps lingering like this? We could have used that money to expand the business." He turned to my father, who was lurking at the top of the stairs, avoiding looking at his own father. "Darnell, we need to figure this out," Brad called up. "We cannot list the house with him drooling in the basement. It kills the property value." My father cleared his throat. "Let's go upstairs. It stinks down here." They filed out, leaving Grandpa alone in the dark again. My mother paused at the door, looking back at me. "Coming, Jasmine?" she asked. "Or do you prefer the dungeon?" I walked over to Grandpa and squeezed his hand quickly, a silent promise that their reckoning was coming. Then I followed the wolves upstairs. The atmosphere in the kitchen had shifted completely. The somber mood of the basement was gone, replaced by the manic energy of unpacking. Chantel was pulling boxes of designer shoes out of her bag, holding them up for admiration. "Look at these, Jasmine," she squealed, holding up a pair of red bottom heels. "Limited edition. Brad bought them for me after he won big at the casino on the ship. Aren't they to die for?" "They are nice," I said, leaning against the counter, feeling invisible. My father was pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter, not bothering to ask if I wanted one. He downed the amber liquid in one gulp and turned to face me. His face was serious now, the mask of the grieving son gone, replaced by the face of a man who was scrambling to cover his tracks. "Listen, Jasmine," he said, setting the glass down hard. "We need to talk about tonight." I looked at him. "What is tonight?" "We are having people over," my mother interjected, smoothing her hair in the reflection of the oven door. "Just a small gathering. Some business associates of Brad's and a few friends from the club. We need to celebrate the new year and maintain appearances." "You are throwing a party?" I asked incredulously. "Grandpa is dying in the basement and you are throwing a party." "It is a networking event," Jasmine, Brad snapped. "You wouldn't understand. You are content with your little salary, but we are trying to build an empire here. We need investors, and investors like to see success. They do not like to see sad, dying relatives." My father stepped closer to me, his alcohol-laced breath hitting my face. "Here is the deal, Jasmine," my father said, his voice low and threatening. "You can stay for dinner if you want, but you are to keep your mouth shut. You do not talk about the basement, you do not talk about the cruise, and you certainly do not let anyone go down there." He pointed a finger at my chest. "If anyone asks, Grandpa is resting comfortably at a specialized facility in Vermont. Do you understand me?" I looked at my father. I looked at the fear behind his aggression. He was terrified that his facade would crack. "I understand, Dad," I said, lowering my eyes submissively. "I will make sure the door stays locked." "Good," he grunted. "Now go change. You look like you have been living in a cave for a week." I walked toward the guest room, my heart pounding a rhythm of war against my ribs. They were inviting an audience. They were bringing the elite of Boston right into our trap. I could not have planned it better myself. As I closed the bedroom door, I pulled out my phone and texted Sterling. "They are back, and they are throwing a party tonight. Get the paperwork ready." I looked at myself in the mirror. I did look tired. I looked worn out. But under the exhaustion, I saw something new. I saw the face of a woman who was about to burn this entire house of cards to the ground. They wanted me to be the gatekeeper. Fine. I would guard the door, but I would be the one to open it when the time was right. The dining room was warm, smelling of rosemary and roasted lamb, but to me it reeked of betrayal. My mother had gone all out for this dinner, bringing out the fine china that was usually reserved for Thanksgiving. Crystal wine glasses sparkled under the chandelier light, and heavy silver platters were piled high with food. It was a feast fit for a king, but the king was lying in a freezing basement with a belly full of oatmeal, while the usurpers feasted on his wealth. I walked into the room and stopped cold. Brad was sitting at the head of the table. That was Grandpa's chair. It was a heavy mahogany seat with high armrests, the place where Elijah had presided over this family for 50 years. No one else ever sat there, not even my father. It was a symbol of authority, a symbol of the man who paid the bills. Seeing Brad lounging in it, spreading his legs and swirling a glass of red wine, made my stomach turn. He looked like a child playing dress-up in a giant's castle. "Sit down, Jasmine," my father grunted, pointing to a small folding chair squeezed into the corner near the kitchen door. "We are short a seat since we invited the Millers, so you will have to make do." I looked at the table. There were 6 comfortable upholstered chairs. There were only 5 people eating, including me. They had intentionally removed a regular chair and replaced it with the uncomfortable wooden folding chair, just to remind me of my place. I was not family to them. I was the help. I was the inconvenience. I sat down silently, pulling my napkin onto my lap. Brad raised his glass. To a successful vacation, he announced, his voice booming. "And to new beginnings." To new beginnings, the rest of them chorused, clinking their glasses. They began to eat with ravenous appetites. My mother cut into her lamb with surgical precision, ignoring the fact that her father was starving just 1 floor below. I pushed the food around my plate, my throat too tight to swallow. So Brad said, chewing with his mouth slightly open, "I have been looking at the blueprints for the renovation. Once we get full title to the house next month, I think we should start with the ground floor." Chantel nodded eagerly, wiping grease from her lips. "I agree. That library has to go. It is so dark and depressing. All those old books smell like mold." My hand froze on my fork. The library was Grandpa's sanctuary. It was where he taught me how to read financial statements. It was where he told me stories about his childhood in the segregated South. It was the heart of the house. "What do you want to replace it with?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "A home gym," Brad said decisively. "A really state-of-the-art one. Mirrored walls, expensive equipment, maybe a sauna. We need to modernize this place if we want to flip it, or even if we decide to live here. Who reads books anymore anyway?" I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. They were not just killing him, they were erasing him. They wanted to scrub every trace of Elijah's intellect and hard work out of the house and replace it with vanity and sweat. "That sounds expensive," I said quietly. Chantel laughed a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She reached down beside her chair and lifted a large orange bag, placing it directly on the table next to the gravy boat. It was a Hermes Birkin bag. I knew exactly what it was, and I knew exactly how much it cost. "We are not worried about money," Jasmine Chantel smirked, patting the leather. "Brad has been managing the accounts while Grandpa has been indisposed. He is a wizard with finances. Look at this early birthday present he bought me. Isn't it gorgeous?" I stared at the bag. It was the Birkin 30 in Togo leather. Retail price around $25,000 if you could get on the list. Resale price even higher. 2 days ago, while I was auditing the family accounts from the safety of my laptop, I had noticed a withdrawal of $25,000 from the Elijah Medical Trust account. The memo on the withdrawal said, "Emergency Specialist Consultation." I looked at the bag, then I looked at my sister. "That is a beautiful bag, Chantel," I said, my voice icy. "It costs about the same as a year of physical therapy. Or a specialized nurse." Brad stopped chewing. He lowered his fork slowly. His eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you auditing us, Jasmine?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I am just observing," I said, shrugging. "I am an auditor, Brad. It is what I do. I see numbers, I see assets, and I see liabilities." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough," Darnell shouted. "We are having a nice family dinner. I will not have you ruining it with your jealousy, Jasmine. Just because you drive a Honda and live in a rental does not mean you get to judge how we spend our money." "It is Grandpa's money," I corrected him. "It is family money," my mother snapped. "And we are the family." "You have always been so selfish, Jasmine, always counting pennies while the rest of us try to enjoy life. This is why you are alone. This is why no man wants to marry a woman who cares more about spreadsheets than people." The insult stung, but I let it slide. They could attack me all they wanted. It only made the recording on my phone sound better. I had been recording since I walked into the room. Brad wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and leaned back in Grandpa's chair. The wood creaked under his weight. "You know, Jasmine," Brad said, his tone shifting from angry to condescendingly pitying, "I think I know what this is about. You are stressed. You are worried about your future. I get it. It must be hard watching everyone else succeed while you tread water." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a sleek black pen. He slid them across the polished mahogany table toward me. The paper stopped right next to my untouched plate. I picked it up. It was a legal document. A quitclaim deed and waiver of inheritance rights. "What is this?" I asked, looking up at him. "It is an olive branch," Brad said, smiling like a shark. "We discussed it on the cruise. We know you and Grandpa were close, but we also know that when he passes, things are going to get messy. Probate courts, lawyers' fees, fighting over who gets the antique lamps. We want to spare you that pain." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "If you sign that paper right now, Jasmine, you are agreeing to step away from the estate. You waive any claim to the house, the accounts, and the assets." "And in exchange," I asked, reading the fine print. Brad reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. $10,000, Brad said. Cash. Untraceable. Tax-free. I stared at the envelope. Then I looked at the house around me. The property alone was worth $5 million. The accounts held another 10. And he was offering me $10,000. It was not a settlement. It was a tip. He was tipping me to go away. Consider it a charity donation to the Jasmine Survival Fund. Chantel giggled, sipping her wine. You can finally fix that dent in your car, or buy some clothes that do not look like they came from a clearance rack. My father nodded in agreement. It is a generous offer, Jasmine. You should take it. If you wait for the will, you might end up with nothing. You know how unpredictable Grandpa was at the end. He might have left it all to a cat shelter. I looked at the faces around the table. My mother the narcissist, my father the coward, Chantel the parasite, and Brad the thief. They were so confident. They truly believed they held all the cards. They thought I was a desperate poor relation who would jump at the sight of a stack of hundreds. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, but I choked it down. I needed them to stay confident. I needed them to sign the modification to the trust on New Year's Eve. If I fought them now, if I threw this money in their faces, they might get suspicious. I picked up the envelope. I opened the flap and looked at the money. It was real. $10,000. I said softly, testing the weight of it in my hand. Take it. Brad urged, his eyes gleaming with greed. Just sign the paper and you can leave. You do not even have to finish dinner. Go back to your apartment in Chicago. We will handle the funeral when the time comes. We will handle everything. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the paper. I cannot sign this tonight, I said. Brad's smile faltered. Why not? Because I need a witness, I lied smoothly. And a notary, to make it legal. You want this to be watertight, don't you, Brad? You don't want me coming back in 6 months claiming I was coerced. Brad hesitated. He exchanged a look with my father. She is right, Darnell said. We need it notarized. Fine. Brad snapped, snatching the pen back but leaving the money. You have until New Year's Eve. We are having the notary come for the party anyway to handle some business updates. You sign it then, in front of everyone. He pointed a finger at me. But the offer expires at midnight on the 31st. If you do not sign by then, the deal is off, and I will make sure you do not get a single dime from this estate. I will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. I stood up, clutching the envelope. I did not need to act offended anymore. The disgust radiating off me was real. I will be there, I said. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I could hear them laughing as I left. I heard the pop of another cork. She actually took it, Chantel laughed. God, she is so pathetic. 10 grand and she sold out her beloved grandpa. I walked down the hall past the basement door. I tapped it lightly twice with my foot, a signal to Grandpa that I was still here. Then I went to the guest room and locked the door. I threw the envelope on the bed. Pathetic. They called me pathetic. I pulled out my phone and texted Sterling. They offered me $10,000 to walk away. I stalled them until the party. They are bringing a notary, Sterling replied instantly. Perfect. A notary is exactly what we need for Elijah to sign the amendment. They are digging their own graves, Jasmine. Just keep them happy for 4 more days. I looked at the cash on the bed. I would keep it. I would use it to pay for the celebratory dinner Grandpa and I would have once we kicked them out into the snow. The vultures were full tonight, but they had no idea that they were eating their last meal. The house was sleeping, but I was haunting it. It was 2 in the morning, and the silence in the Beacon Hill brownstone was heavy and suffocating. My parents and sister were upstairs, passed out in their king-sized beds, sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the guilty and the entitled. They had feasted on roasted lamb and expensive wine, while my grandfather lay in the basement, shivering under thin blankets. I sat in the guest room in the dark, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen. I had set up a baby monitor camera in the basement years ago when Grandpa first got sick, just so I could check on him from Chicago. My parents had forgotten it existed, just like they had forgotten he was a human being. Now it was my window into their crimes. I stared at the grainy black and white feed. Grandpa was a motionless lump on the cot. His chest rose and fell in a shallow rhythm. Every time he took a breath, I exhaled with him. We were two soldiers in a trench waiting for the enemy to make a move. I sipped cold coffee and rubbed my burning eyes. Sterling had told me to be vigilant, but I did not think anything would happen tonight. I thought they were too full and too lazy to bother with the basement until morning. I was wrong. At 2:15, I saw a shadow move on the screen. The handle of the basement door turned slowly. It was agonizingly slow, a deliberate attempt to be silent. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I leaned closer to the screen, my fingers gripping the edge of the desk. The door creaked open. A beam of light from the hallway cut through the darkness of the basement. A figure stepped onto the landing. It was Brad. He was still wearing his dress pants from dinner, but he had taken off his jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the top, and even in the low light of the camera, I could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead. He did not look like the arrogant businessman who had sat at the head of the table earlier. He looked desperate. He looked like a cornered animal. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the hallway light. He switched on the flashlight function of his phone, holding it low so the beam crawled across the floor like a snake. He descended the stairs one by one, testing the wood to avoid creaking. "What are you doing, Brad?" I whispered to the screen. He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward the cot. He stopped a few feet away, shining the light directly on Grandpa's face. Grandpa did not move. He was either in a deep sleep or he was playing possum perfectly. Brad stood there for a long moment, just breathing. Then I heard it. The camera had a microphone, and it picked up his voice low and trembling. "Just die already, old man." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a tight circle around the cot. "I do not have time for this," he muttered to himself. "The margin call is Monday. If I do not have the liquid cash, they are going to break my legs. Why do you have to be so stubborn?" I froze. Margin call. So that was it. Brad was not just greedy, he was in debt. He had likely leveraged his own assets or maybe even embezzled funds, hoping to pay it back once he got his hands on the inheritance. But Grandpa staying alive was ruining his timeline. Brad stopped pacing. He reached into his pocket. My blood ran cold as I saw what he pulled out. It was a small glass vial and a syringe. I gasped, covering my mouth to stifle the sound. It was morphine. Grandpa had a prescription for it for the pain from his stroke, but we kept it locked in the master bath upstairs. Brad must have stolen it. A dose that size for a man in Grandpa's condition and weight would not just stop the pain, it would stop his heart. This was not passive neglect anymore. This was active execution. Brad uncapped the needle. He tapped the side of the syringe, clearing the air bubbles with a practiced flick of his finger. He looked down at my grandfather with a mix of fear and hatred. "I am doing you a favor, Elijah," Brad whispered, stepping closer. "You are cold. You are hungry. Just go to sleep and it will all be over. And then I can finally breathe." He knelt beside the cot. He reached for Grandpa's thin arm, searching for a vein in the crook of his elbow. I had to stop him. If I ran down there now, I would never make it in time. And if I confronted him, he might panic and plunge the needle in anyway. I needed to scare him. I needed to make him think he was being watched by something bigger than me. My eyes darted to the control panel of the home security app on my laptop. My father had installed a high-end system recently, one that included a panic feature that could blast a siren through specific speakers in the house. I hovered my mouse over the basement speaker option. Brad found the vein. He positioned the needle. "Do not do it, Brad," I hissed through my teeth. He began to push the tip of the needle against the skin. I clicked the button. A deafening siren wail exploded in the basement. It was the sound of a police cruiser amplified to maximum volume. "Whoop, whoop!" Brad screamed. He jumped back as if he had been electrocuted. His arms flailed in panic and the syringe flew out of his hand. It clattered onto the concrete floor, rolling away into the shadows under the lumber pile. The sound was isolated to the basement speakers, so it was muffled for the rest of the house. But down there, it must have been ear-splitting. "What the hell?" Brad shouted, scrambling backwards on his hands and feet, Crab walking away from the cot. He looked around wildly, thinking the police were storming the doors. He looked at the ceiling, expecting a SWAT team. I quickly cut the sound before it woke my parents upstairs. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Brad sat on the floor, panting heavily, clutching his chest. He looked at the cot. Grandpa had shifted slightly, groaning as if disturbed by a noise in a dream, but he did not wake up. Brad looked at the door. Then he looked at the darkness where the syringe had fallen. He made a move to look for it, but then a floorboard creaked above him, probably me shifting my weight in the guest room. Paranoia seized him. He scrambled to his feet, forgetting the needle, forgetting his dignity. He sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He burst through the door and slammed it shut behind him. I watched the feed as he locked it from the outside, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the key twice. He was gone. I slumped back in my chair, my entire body drenched in sweat. I checked the monitor. Grandpa was safe. The intruder had been repelled. But the weapon was still down there. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat guard, my eyes glued to the screen, daring him to come back. But he didn't. He was a coward who only struck when he felt safe. The sun rose gray and bleak over Boston. The blizzard had stopped, leaving the world buried in white. I waited until I heard the shower running in the master suite upstairs, signaling that my parents were awake and distracted. I slipped out of my room and crept down to the kitchen. I unlocked the basement door quietly and went down. The air was still freezing, but the terror of the night before still hung in the atmosphere. I walked over to the spot where Brad had fallen. I used the flashlight on my phone to sweep under the pile of lumber. There it was. The syringe. It was still full of clear, lethal liquid. The needle was uncapped, glinting in the light. I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my pocket, which I had brought for cleaning Grandpa, and carefully picked it up. I placed it inside a plastic Ziploc bag, sealing it tight. I looked at Grandpa. He was awake now, watching me. "Did you hear the siren?" I asked softly. He nodded slowly. "It was loud." "Was that you?" "It was me," I said, holding up the bag. "Brad tried to give you medicine you did not need." Grandpa looked at the syringe, and a tear leaked from the corner of his eye. "He tried to kill me. He actually tried to kill me." "He is desperate, Grandpa," I said, putting the bag in my pocket next to the phone with the recordings. "And desperate men make mistakes. This is evidence number 2. I went back upstairs just as Brad walked into the kitchen. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, and he jumped when the toaster popped. He was wearing a turtleneck sweater to hide the sweat on his neck. "Good morning, Brad," I said, pouring myself coffee. "You look tired. Did you have trouble sleeping?" He stared at me, looking for any sign that I knew. But I kept my face blank, a mask of indifference. "Just bad dreams," he muttered, grabbing a bottle of water. "I thought I heard noises in the house." "Old houses make noise," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Pipes groaning, floorboards creaking. Or maybe it is just the guilt." He dropped the bottle cap. "What did you say?" I smiled sweetly. I said, "Maybe it is just the silt. In the pipes. It makes them rattle." He glared at me and stormed out of the room. I patted my pocket, feeling the shape of the syringe. Tonight was New Year's Eve. Tonight was the party. And tonight Brad was going to find out that the noise in the basement wasn't a ghost. It was his judgment day coming for him. I spent the morning polishing silver that did not belong to me. My mother had left a list of chores on the counter before she went to the salon, because apparently maintaining the lifestyle of the rich and idle required a lot of delegation. I wiped the tarnish off the heavy candlesticks and listened to the silence of the house. Grandpa was safe in the basement with a fresh supply of water and a new heating pad I had smuggled down. My parents were out spending money they did not have yet. That left only Brad and me. Around 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was not the polite chime of a neighbor, but a long, impatient press. I was about to answer it when Brad came sprinting down the stairs. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, and he smelled like mouthwash and desperation. "Get back in the kitchen, Jasmine," he hissed at me, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "I have a very important meeting. Do not come out unless I call for coffee. And for God's sake, try to look less like a librarian and more like someone who belongs in a service role." I didn't argue. I retreated to the kitchen and pushed the swinging door open just a crack. I needed to see who was worth this much panic. Brad opened the front door. A man stepped in, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He was short, stocky, and wearing a camel hair coat that looked expensive but tacky. He did not wipe his feet. He walked straight onto the antique Persian rug, leaving wet, slushy footprints on the silk threads. "Mr. Russo," Brad said, pumping the man's hand with too much enthusiasm. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Russo looked around the foyer, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. He did not look impressed by the high ceilings or the crown molding. He looked like he was calculating the demolition costs. "Is this it?" Russo asked, his voice rough and gravelly. "It is smaller than the pictures. It is 4,000 square feet, Brad said, quickly closing the door, plus a finished basement and a carriage house in the back. The location is prime Beacon Hill. You cannot get this kind of square footage in the city anymore." Russo grunted. He began to walk through the house, not waiting for Brad to lead him. I watched from the crack in the door. This was not a normal real estate showing. There was no agent. There were no brochures. This was a back alley deal happening in broad daylight. I quickly filled a pitcher with ice water and grabbed 2 glasses. If I was going to be the help, I might as well be the best eavesdropper in Boston. I walked into the living room just as they were sitting down. Russo threw his heavy coat onto my grandmother's velvet armchair. Brad sat opposite him, perched on the edge of the sofa, looking like a schoolboy in the principal's office. "Water?" I asked, keeping my eyes lowered. Brad waved a hand at me dismissively. "Just put it down and go." I poured the water slowly, taking my time. "So let us cut the crap," Russo said, ignoring the glass. "You said you have the title. But my guy at the registry says the house is still in the name of an Elijah Vance." Brad swallowed hard. "Elijah is my wife's grandfather. He is incapacitated. I have full power of attorney. I handle all his assets. I can sign the transfer deed today." Russo laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "Power of attorney is cute, kid. But it is messy. If the old man wakes up, or if some other relative pops up with a lawyer, my investment gets tied up in court. I do not do courts. I do cash, fast and clean." I moved to the window, pretending to adjust the curtains. I needed to hear the numbers. "The house is appraised at 6.2 million, Brad said, his voice trembling slightly. "But because we want a quick close, I am willing to let it go for 5. 5, Russo scoffed. "You are dreaming. The plumbing is ancient. The wiring probably dates back to the Revolution. I have to gut the whole place. I am tearing down these walls, putting in condos. That takes time and money." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. 3.5 million, cash. Wired to your account in the Cayman Islands by Tuesday morning. I almost dropped the curtain tieback. 3.5 million. He was selling a $6 million historic landmark for half its value. And he wanted it wired to an offshore account. This wasn't just a sale. This was a heist. Brad was stealing the equity and planning to hide it before the rest of the family even knew what happened. 3.5 is too low, Brad pleaded, sweat beading on his upper lip. "I have debts, Russo. Significant debts. The gambling commission is breathing down my neck. I need at least 4. 4, Russo said, rubbing his chin. "Maybe. But only if the title is clean. Completely clean." "What do you mean?" Brad asked. "I mean, I do not want a power of attorney sale," Russo said. "It is too risky. I want an executor sale. I want to buy this house from the estate of the deceased. It is cleaner that way. No one can contest it if the owner is dead." The room went silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a bomb countdown. I turned slowly to look at them. Brad was staring at his hands. "He is very sick," Brad said quietly. "It is only a matter of time." "I do not have time," Russo snapped, standing up. "I have other properties to look at. I need this deal closed by next week or I walk. And if I walk, you know what happens to your knees when those bookies catch up with you." Brad stood up too, panic flaring in his eyes. "No, wait. Do not walk. We can do this." Russo buttoned his coat. "I need a death certificate, Brad. You get me a death certificate and I will wire you $4 million. No questions asked." Brad looked at the man. Then he looked around the room at the life my grandfather had built. He did not see memories. He saw a lifeline for his own mistakes. "Today is Thursday," Brad said, his voice steadying into a cold resolve. "Monday." "What about Monday?" Russo asked. "You will have the certificate by Monday morning," Brad said. "The funeral will be Tuesday. We can close on Wednesday." Russo smiled, exposing yellow teeth. "Now you are talking business. You get me that paper and your problems disappear." They shook hands. It was a deal made in hell, sealed with the promise of murder. I stood frozen by the window as they walked to the door. Brad opened it and Russo stepped out into the snow, leaving another muddy trail. "See you Monday, kid," Russo called out. "Do not disappoint me." Brad closed the door and leaned his forehead against the wood, letting out a long, shaky breath. He thought he was alone. He thought the maid had gone back to the kitchen. "Monday," he whispered to himself. "I can do Monday." He turned around and jumped when he saw me standing there. "How long have you been there?" he demanded, his eyes wide. "I just came back to get the picture," I said, keeping my face blank. I did not hear anything. He walked over to me, invading my personal space. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "You heard nothing," he hissed. "You saw nothing. That man was a contractor. We were discussing repairs." He looked like a contractor, I agreed, lying through my teeth. "And $4 million sounds like a very expensive repair." Brad's face turned purple. He shoved me backward. "You are smart, Jasmine. But do not be too smart. Remember who holds the purse strings. Remember who decides if you get a penny from this estate." I rubbed my arm where he had grabbed me. "I remember, Brad. I remember everything." He stormed upstairs, probably to check his stash of morphine or to look up how to stage a natural death. I waited until I heard his bedroom door slam, then I pulled out my phone. I had not recorded audio this time, but I had heard enough. I typed a note into my secure file. Target date: Monday morning. Motive: gambling, debt to loan sharks. Price: $4 million, cash offshore. Method: induced death before Monday. I walked to the kitchen and dumped the ice water into the sink. The ice cubes clattered against the metal. Monday. He promised a death certificate by Monday. That meant he had to kill Grandpa this weekend. Probably during the New Year's Eve party when the house was full of noise and chaos. It was the perfect cover. I went to the basement door and unlocked it quietly. I slipped down into the darkness. Grandpa was sitting up on the cot reading a book by the light of a small camping lantern. "How was the meeting?" Grandpa asked, not looking up from his book. "Expensive," I said, sitting on the edge of the cot. "Brad just sold your house for $4 million to a shark in a camel coat." Grandpa chuckled dryly. He always was a bad negotiator. "This house is worth 6.5 in this market. He promised the buyer you would be dead by Monday," I said, my voice dropping. Grandpa closed the book. He took off his reading glasses and looked at me. His eyes were not afraid. They were angry. A deep, ancient anger that burned slow and hot. "Monday," he repeated. "Well, that is inconvenient. I had planned on living until at least Tuesday." He reached out and patted my hand. "Let him try, Jasmine. Let him try. He thinks he is playing chess, but he does not realize he is already in checkmate." I looked at the old man who had raised me. He was right. Brad was desperate and reckless. He had just given us a deadline. But he had also given us the final piece of the puzzle. We did not just have negligence anymore. We had premeditated murder for financial gain with a witness. "I am going to call Sterling," I said, standing up. "We need to speed up the paperwork. If Brad is planning to make his move at the party, we need to be ready to make ours." "Go," Grandpa said. And Jasmine, "Yes, Grandpa, make sure you polish the silver properly. If I am going to come back from the dead, I want my house to shine." I smiled for the first time in days. "Yes, sir." I walked back up the stairs, leaving the ghost in the basement. Monday was coming. But so was New Year's Eve. And Brad had no idea that the champagne he was planning to drink would be the most bitter toast of his life. The hallway on the second floor was the demilitarized zone, or at least that is what I tried to tell myself. It was the neutral ground between my small guest room and the sprawling master suite, where my parents were currently arguing about floral arrangements for a funeral they had not yet scheduled. But the real danger was not my parents. It was the room at the end of the hall, the room with the gold-painted crown molding and the walk-in closet that was larger than my entire apartment in Chicago. My sister Chantel's room. I had been trying to avoid her all day. After the dinner where Brad tried to bribe me and the morning where he sold the house out from under us, I had reached my limit of toxic interactions. But I needed to get to the linen closet, which was unfortunately situated right next to her door. I needed fresh towels for Grandpa. The ones in the basement were getting damp, and if I was going to keep him healthy for another 36 hours, hygiene was non-negotiable. I walked softly, my socks making no sound on the plush carpet. I reached the linen closet and opened it quietly. I was reaching for a stack of white towels when the door next to me flew open. Chantel stood there. She was wearing a silk robe that was open slightly, revealing expensive lingerie. She had a clay mask on her face, giving her the appearance of a cracked statue. Snooping again Jasmine, she asked, her voice muffled slightly by the drying clay. "I am getting towels, Chantel," I said, clutching the stack to my chest. "Believe it or not, the world does not revolve around you. I have no interest in what you are doing in there." She leaned against the doorframe, blocking my path. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with that familiar mix of pity and disgust. "You know you are pathetic," she said. "You are walking around this house like a ghost. Cleaning, serving, taking abuse from Brad. Why do you even stay? Is it for the $10,000? I looked at her. I looked at the sister I used to share a bunk bed with. The sister I used to protect from bullies on the playground. Somewhere along the line, she had become the bully. "I stay because he is my grandfather too," I said calmly. "And unlike you, I do not see him as a walking ATM." Chantel laughed, a harsh sound that cracked the dry clay on her cheeks. "Oh, please spare me the saint act. You think you are so much better than us because you have a job and pay your own bills. But you are just bitter. You are bitter because you know the truth." "What truth is that, Chantel?" "That you were never really one of us," she spat. She stepped closer, forcing me to back up against the wall. The smell of her expensive skincare products was overpowering. "Mom never loved you, Jasmine. Not really. Do you know why? Because every time she looks at you, she sees Grandma Rose." I froze. Grandma Rose had died when I was 5. She was Grandpa Elijah's wife, a strong, fierce woman who had built the business alongside him. My mother hated her. My mother hated that Grandma Rose saw through her gold-digging ways from day one. "You have her face," Chantel continued, poking a manicured finger into my shoulder. "You have her eyes. You have her judgmental attitude. Mom hated that old woman. She made Mom's life miserable, constantly criticizing her spending, telling Dad he needed a backbone. And when she died and you started growing up looking exactly like her, well, let's just say it is hard to love a child who reminds you of your enemy." It hurt. It was a wound I had always felt, but never heard spoken aloud. It explained the coldness. It explained why Chantel got the ballet lessons and the cars, while I got chores and lectures. I was the reincarnation of the woman who tried to stop them from spending the family fortune. And Grandpa loved you for it, Chantel said, her voice dripping with venom. He played favorites. He always took your side. Jasmine gets straight A's. Jasmine is so responsible. Jasmine should learn the business. She threw her hands up. God, I hated him for that. Do you remember the summer I turned 16? I wanted a convertible. All my friends were getting cars. And what did Grandpa do? He told me if I wanted a car, I had to work for it. He made me scrub toilets at his rental properties. Jasmine. Me. Scrubbing toilets. He was trying to teach you the value of $1, I said quietly. He wanted you to understand that money is earned, not given. He was trying to humiliate me, she screamed. He wanted to break me. He wanted to make me like you. Boring, plain, working class. She took a breath, her chest heaving. But he failed. I am not like you. I deserve the best. I deserve this house. I deserve the money. And now that he is finally dying, I am going to take back everything he denied me. I am going to buy the cars and the clothes, and I am never going to work a day in my life again. That is my revenge, Jasmine, living well while he rots in the ground. Her entitlement was suffocating. She truly believed she was the victim. She believed that being asked to work was abuse. She was a monster created by my parents and fueled by my grandfather's money. You are going to burn through that money in 5 years, I said, keeping my voice steady. You and Brad. You are not builders, Chantel. You are consumers. You will eat this legacy until there is nothing left but bones. And when the money is gone, you will have nothing. No skills, no friends, no family. Chantel's eyes widened. The truth stung her more than any insult could. Shut up, she hissed. She raised her hand and swung. It happened in slow motion. I saw her palm coming. I could have blocked it. I took self-defense classes in college. I could have caught her wrist and twisted it, but I didn't. I let it happen. The slap connected with my cheek with a sharp crack. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, hot, and throbbing. I tasted a metallic tang of blood where my tooth had cut the inside of my lip. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. I did not cry. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I just slowly turned my head back to look at her. Chantel was breathing hard, her hand hovering in the air. She looked surprised by her own violence. For a second I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She waited for me to scream. She waited for me to fight back. Instead I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. That was a mistake, Chantel. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was far scarier than a shout. She lowered her hand, trying to regain her composure. You deserved it. You provoked me. I stepped closer to her, invading her space this time. Physical assault, I said, on a family member, in a home where you are currently trying to secure legal ownership. I leaned in close to her ear. That slap just cost you $5 million, sister. What are you talking about? She stammered, backing away toward her room. You are crazy. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, memorizing the look on her face, the crack in her mask. Go put some ice on your hand, I said, turning away. You do not want to bruise your knuckles before the party tomorrow. You need to look perfect when you lose everything. I walked away, my cheek burning, but my heart cold as ice. I heard her door slam behind me, followed by the sound of the lock turning. She was afraid. Good. I went into the guest room and locked my own door. I went straight to the mirror. My cheek was already turning red. A bruise was forming. I took my phone and snapped 3 photos, one from the front, one from the side, and one close-up of the split lip. I uploaded them immediately to the secure cloud folder shared with Sterling. Folder name: Evidence, Assault. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sterling. The paperwork is finalized. The amendment is drafted exactly as Elijah dictated. The notary is on my payroll and will be at the party undercover as a guest, until the moment comes. We are ready. H hour is 8:00 p.m. tomorrow night. I looked at the text. Then I looked at my reflection. The bruise on my cheek was ugly, but to me it looked like a badge of honor. It was the final justification. They had taken my childhood. They had taken my grandfather's health. And now they had raised a hand against me. I touched the screen. Copy that, Sterling. We will be ready. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was New Year's Eve. The world would be celebrating new beginnings. But in this house we were preparing for an ending. Chantel thought she had put me in my place with that slap. She had no idea she had just signed her own eviction notice. The countdown had begun. New Year's Eve arrived with a biting frost outside and a feverish heat inside. The brownstone in Beacon Hill had been transformed from a house of mourning into a stage for the most expensive performance of my parents' lives. By noon, the first floor was swarming with caterers in black vests, moving like ants, carrying silver trays of caviar and foie gras. My mother Vanessa was directing them with the precision of a drill sergeant, her voice shrill and demanding. She wanted everything perfect. She wanted the world to see that the Vance family was thriving, even as its patriarch lay dying in the basement. I walked through the chaos like a ghost. I was wearing a simple black dress, blending into the background just as they wanted. I carried a tray of champagne flutes not because I was asked, but because it gave me a reason to be everywhere at once. I needed to know the layout. I needed to know where the exits were and exactly when the guests would arrive. I passed the open door of the study. My father Darnell was standing in front of the mirror adjusting his silk tie. He was muttering to himself, rehearsing the speech that would seal his fate. It is with a heavy heart, but great hope, he practiced, his voice dripping with fake solemnity, that I announce a transition in the Vance legacy. Due to my father's declining health, he has decided to step back. I gripped the tray tighter. He was lying to the mirror, and the mirror was lying back, telling him he looked like a leader. He looked like a thief in a tuxedo. I slipped away, moving toward the kitchen and down the back service stairs to the basement. The noise of the party preparation faded as I descended into the cold. This was my domain now. Grandpa Elijah was waiting. He was sitting on the edge of the cot, his back straight, his eyes clear. We had spent the last hour scrubbing the grime of the last 10 days off his skin. I had shaved his face, revealing the strong jawline that I saw in my own reflection every morning. He looked thin, yes. The hunger and the cold had taken their toll, but he did not look weak. He looked like a blade that had been sharpened against a stone. "Are they ready?" Grandpa asked, his voice low. "They are setting up the champagne tower," I said, putting the tray down on a workbench. "Dad is practicing his speech. He is going to announce Brad as the new manager of the assets tonight." Grandpa nodded slowly. "A usurper on the throne. We cannot have that." I walked over to the garment bag I had smuggled in earlier that morning. I unzipped it, revealing the suit inside. It was a midnight blue tuxedo custom-made on Savile Row 30 years ago. It was the suit Grandpa wore when he rang the opening bell at the stock exchange. It smelled of cedar and history. I helped him stand. His legs were shaky, but he locked his knees, refusing to collapse. I helped him into the crisp white shirt, fastening the pearl buttons. I tied his bow tie, my fingers lingering on the fabric. "You look handsome, Grandpa," I whispered, fighting back tears. He looked at me, and for a moment, the warrior mask slipped, and I saw the grandfather who used to push me on the swings. "I am sorry you have to see this, Jasmine," he said softly. "A child should not have to go to war against her own parents." "They started the war," I said, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "We are just finishing it." I guided him to the corner of the room where the electric wheelchair was waiting. We had kept it hidden under a tarp, charged and ready. It was not the flimsy hospital chair my parents had rented for appearances. This was his chair, the heavy-duty model he used to inspect construction sites before the stroke. He sat down, and the machine hummed to life. He placed his hands on the controls, his grip firm. "I have one last lesson for Darnell," he said, his eyes hardening. "I taught him how to walk. I taught him how to tie his shoes, but I never taught him the most important thing." "What is that?" I asked. "Consequences," Grandpa said. "Today, I teach him consequences." I checked my watch. It was 7:30. The guests would start arriving in 30 minutes. Brad would be coming down for a final check any minute now to make sure the prisoner was secure. We had to move. We took the service elevator, a narrow lift used for laundry that bypassed the main floors and opened into a small storage closet off the library. It was a tight squeeze, but we made it. I hid Grandpa in the dark closet behind racks of winter coats. "Stay here," I whispered. "Wait for my signal. When the clock strikes 10 and Dad starts his speech, you come out." "Give them hell, Jasmine," he said, winking. I closed the closet door and sprinted back to the service elevator, taking it down to the basement. I ran to the cot and threw the blankets on the floor, making it look like a struggle. I overturned the water bowl. I wanted it to look like he had not just left but escaped. Or worse. I ran back up the stairs and slipped into the kitchen just as Brad came in. He was sweating again, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He was nervous. He knew what he had promised the real estate developer. Monday was coming and he needed a body. "Where are you going?" Brad snapped, seeing me near the basement door. "Just getting more ice?" I said, holding up an empty bucket. He glared at me, then pushed past me toward the basement door. I held my breath. This was the moment. He unlocked the door and went down. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 2. I heard a shout. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. He came running back up the stairs, his face pale as a sheet. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wild. "Where is he?" Brad hissed, grabbing my shoulders. "Where is he, Jasmine?" I looked at him with feigned confusion. "Who?" "The old man," he snarled, shaking me. "The cot is empty." "He is gone." I gasped, putting a hand to my throat. "That is impossible." I locked the door. "Did you check the bathroom down there?" "I checked everywhere," Brad yelled. "He is gone. How can a man who cannot walk just vanish? Maybe he crawled out," I suggested, helpful and cruel. "Maybe he is hiding in the walls." Brad looked around the kitchen, paranoid and terrified. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up his perfect styling. "If he gets out," he whispered more to himself than to me. "If he gets out and someone sees him." Just then the doorbell rang. A long, elegant chime that signaled the arrival of the first guests. Music started playing from the living room. The sound of a jazz band tuning up floated through the house. Brad froze. He looked at the basement door, then at the hallway leading to the party. He was trapped. He could not start a manhunt now. He had to be the charming host. He had to smile and shake hands while knowing that a witness to his crimes was loose somewhere in the house. "Brad," I said, my voice calm. "The guests are here. You should go greet them. Dad is waiting for you." Brad looked at me with hatred, but he had no choice. He buttoned his jacket, forced a smile onto his face that looked like a rictus of pain, and turned around. "This isn't over," he threatened, pointing a finger at me. "Find him, Jasmine. If you know where he is, tell me. Or so help me God." He didn't finish the threat. He couldn't. He had to go play the part of the successful heir. I watched him walk away into the lights and the music. I picked up a bottle of vintage champagne from the counter. I wasn't drinking tonight, but I felt like making a toast. "Happy New Year, Brad," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "Enjoy the party. It is going to be a night to remember." I walked toward the library where the storage closet was waiting. The trap was set. The players were on stage, and the director was sitting in a wheelchair behind a rack of mink coats, ready to call action on the final act of their destruction. The atmosphere in the house was intoxicating and sickening all at once. By 9 o'clock, the brownstone was packed with the elite of Boston society. Women in shimmering gowns drifted through the rooms like exotic fish, while men in tuxedos huddled in corners discussing mergers and acquisitions. My mother had done a spectacular job with the decorations. White roses were everywhere, spilling out of crystal vases on every surface. The lighting was low and golden, designed to flatter aging faces and hide the dust of a family falling apart. A live jazz band played in the corner of the living room, soft saxophone notes floating over the hum of conversation and the clinking of expensive glassware. It was the perfect picture of old money elegance. I moved through the crowd carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes. I was wearing a plain black dress that rendered me almost invisible to these people. To them, I was just part of the service staff, another pair of hands to facilitate their pleasure. I offered a drink to a woman I recognized as the head of the charity board. My mother was desperate to join. She took the glass without looking at me, her eyes fixed on my father across the room. "Darnell looks so regal tonight," she whispered to her companion. "It is tragic about his father, of course, but Darnell is ready to take the helm. He has such presence." I walked away before I could scoff. Presence was one word for it. Delusion was another. My father was standing by the fireplace holding court. He had a glass of scotch in one hand, and he was gesturing broadly with the other, laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. He looked the part of the grieving yet strong heir. He was soaking up the attention like a sponge desperate for validation. My mother was at his side playing the dutiful wife, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief when anyone offered condolences. It was a masterclass in deception. I scanned the room for the players in our little drama. The notary was there standing near the bar looking uncomfortable in a suit that was a size too big. Sterling had arranged for him to be on the guest list under a fake name. He was sipping club soda, his eyes scanning the room, waiting for the signal. And then there was Brad. My brother-in-law was moving through the crowd, but his movements were jerky and frantic. He was smiling, but his eyes were wide and terrified. Every time a door opened, he jumped. Every time someone laughed, he flinched. He was looking for a ghost. He knew Grandpa was missing from the basement, and the thought that the old man was loose in the house was eating him alive. I made my way toward the kitchen to refill my tray. The catering staff was in a frenzy, plating appetizers of smoked salmon and caviar. I slipped into the back pantry to grab a bottle of sparkling water for myself. I needed a clear head. Suddenly, the pantry door slammed shut behind me. I spun around. Brad was standing there, his chest heaving. He locked the door and turned to me, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He looked deranged. His perfectly styled hair was coming undone, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that no amount of air conditioning could fix. "Where is he?" Brad hissed, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the small space. I leaned back against the shelves, crossing my arms. "I do not know who you are talking about, Brad. Do not play games with me, Jasmine." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "The basement is empty. I checked the perimeter. There are no footprints in the snow. He did not leave the house. You hid him. Tell me where he is." I looked him dead in the eye, keeping my face completely blank. "Maybe he walked out the front door while you were busy trying to sell his house to a shark in a camel coat. Or maybe he just ascended. He was a good man after all, unlike some people in this room." Brad grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh through the fabric of my dress. It hurt, but I did not flinch. I let him feel like he had the power. "Listen to me, you little witch," he whispered, spitting the words at me. "I have a buyer waiting for a death certificate on Monday morning. I have $4 million on the line. If that old man shows up alive tonight and ruins this deal, I am going to kill you. I will throw you down those basement stairs and make it look like an accident. Do you understand me?" I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at the glass of red wine sitting on the counter next to me. It was a vintage Merlot, dark and rich, that a waiter had left behind. "I understand that you are terrified, Brad," I said calmly. I reached out with my free hand and grabbed the stem of the wine glass. Brad saw the movement, but he was too slow and too arrogant to think I would actually do it. I threw the contents of the glass squarely at his chest. The dark red liquid splashed across his pristine white tuxedo shirt, soaking into the expensive fabric instantly. It looked like a gunshot wound blooming across his heart. Droplets splattered up onto his chin and neck. Brad gasped, letting go of my arm and stumbling back. He looked down at his shirt in horror. "You crazy bleep!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Look at what you did. This is $1,000 shirt." I smoothed my sleeve where he had grabbed me. I stepped around him, moving toward the door. "I think you have a stain, Brad," I said, my voice cool and steady. You might want to get that out before the big announcement. It looks like blood on your hands, which is appropriate given that you tried to inject morphine into a helpless old man last night. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The mention of the morphine hit him like a physical blow. He realized then that I knew. He realized that the siren in the basement had not been an accident. He stammered. You saw. I unlocked the pantry door. Go change your shirt, Brad. The show is about to start. And you do not want to miss your curtain call. I walked out, leaving him standing in the pantry smelling of red wine and fear. I knew he would run up the back stairs to change. He was too vain to be seen with a stain and too greedy to miss the reading of the announcement. He would be back, but he would be off balance. I returned to the party. The energy in the room had shifted. The jazz band had stopped playing. A hush was falling over the crowd as people turned toward the fireplace. My father had stepped up to a small podium that had been set up in front of the hearth. He looked flushed and triumphant. My mother stood beside him, beaming with pride, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Chantel was there too, clutching her new Hermes bag like a shield. My father picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against his champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the remaining chatter. Ting, ting, ting. Ladies and gentlemen, Darnell began, his voice booming with false authority. Thank you all for coming tonight. It means the world to Vanessa and me to have our closest friends and esteemed colleagues here to ring in the new year. He paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep over the room. He looked at the faces of the bankers, the lawyers, the socialites. He thought he was one of them. He thought he had finally arrived. As many of you know, my father, Elijah Vance, has been the pillar of this family and this community for 50 years. Darnell continued, his voice dropping to a somber register. But time is a cruel thief. His health has declined rapidly in recent weeks. It has been heartbreaking for us to watch the lion of Boston real estate fade away. I stood near the back of the room next to the library door. My hand was on the handle. My heart was pounding in my chest, not with fear, but with adrenaline. My father took a deep breath, preparing for the lie that would seal his fate. Because of his condition, my father has decided to step down, Darnell announced. And it is with great honor that I announce tonight the official transition of the Vance estate and all its assets. Effective immediately, management of the family trust will be transferred to... He paused, waiting for Brad to appear. I looked toward the back entrance. Brad came rushing in, wearing a fresh shirt but looking pale and sweaty. He nodded to Darnell. To my son-in-law Bradford Miller and myself, Darnell finished raising his glass. To the future of the Vance legacy. To the future, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. I tightened my grip on the library door handle. The toast was made. The lie was told. The trap was sprung. Not quite yet, Dad, I whispered to myself. I pushed the door open. The air in the room was stale with the scent of expensive perfume and lies. My father stood on the raised platform in front of the fireplace, holding his champagne flute like a scepter. He was in the middle of a monologue about sacrifice and legacy, painting a picture of himself as the burdened son carrying the weight of the family empire. Behind him, a large projection screen cycled through carefully curated photos. There was Darnell graduating from college. There was Vanessa holding a baby Chantel. There was a photo of Grandpa Elijah from 10 years ago, looking strong and healthy, smiling at a groundbreaking ceremony. They were rewriting history one slide at a time. They were erasing the neglect, the abuse, and the greed, and replacing it with a Hallmark movie. I stood in the shadows near the audiovisual cart. The laptop controlling the presentation was sitting there humming quietly. It was password protected, of course, but my father used the same password for everything. His own birthday. It took me 3 seconds to unlock it, while the room was distracted by his toast. My father's voice swelled with emotion. Family is not just about blood, he declaimed, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. It is about being there. It is about holding the hand of your loved ones when the winter comes. And though my father is not here with us in body tonight, I know he is watching over us, proud of the transition we are making. I looked at the laptop screen. I had the file ready. It was named simply The Truth. I waited until he raised his glass for the final salute. I waited until the room was perfectly silent, hanging on his every word. "So please join me in welcoming the new stewardship of the Vance estate," my father said, beaming at Brad. I pressed enter. The screen flickered. The photo of Grandpa smiling vanished. The music, the soft jazz playlist I had replaced, cut out abruptly. A screech of static tore through the speakers, causing several guests to cover their ears. My father frowned, turning to look at the screen. "What is this? Jasmine, fix the technical—" His voice died in his throat. The screen stabilized. The image was grainy, taken from a cell phone camera, but the audio was crystal clear. It was a video of my mother Vanessa lounging on a deck chair on a cruise ship. The turquoise water of the Caribbean bobbed in the background. She was holding a martini and wearing oversized sunglasses. The audio boomed through the high-end speakers, filling the silent room. "Honestly, I hope he is dead by the time we get back," Vanessa's recorded voice said, lazy and cruel. "It would save us so much hassle. I do not want to spend the spring cleaning out his room." The crowd gasped. It was a collective sharp intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. My mother, who was standing right next to the screen, turned pale beneath her spray tan. She looked around wildly, laughing nervously. That is a joke," she stammered. "That was taken out of context." But the video cut to the next clip before she could finish her excuse. This one was shot from a hidden angle in the dining room. It showed Darnell sitting at the table with a stack of legal documents. He was holding a pen, his hand shaking slightly. "Just sign it." Darnell Brad's voice came from off-camera. "He is blind as a bat. He will never know it isn't his signature." The video zoomed in as my father forged Elijah Vance's name on a power of attorney document. He did it slowly, practicing the loop of the V on a napkin before committing it to the legal paper. I heard a glass shatter somewhere in the room. A prominent judge, who was a friend of the family, stared at the screen, his mouth open in disbelief. Forgery. He was witnessing a felony being committed by the man who had just toasted to integrity. Darnell dropped his champagne flute. It bounced on the rug, spilling gold liquid everywhere. He looked at the projector, then he looked at me. His eyes were pleading. He wanted me to stop it. He wanted me to be the good daughter and pull the plug. I folded my arms and stared back. I was not the daughter anymore. I was the executioner. The screen flickered one last time. This was the finale. The footage was black and white, taken from the night vision camera in the basement. The room went deathly quiet. You could hear a pin drop. On the screen, Brad crept down the stairs. He looked like a predator. In his hand, the syringe glinted in the infrared light. The timestamp in the corner read, 2:15 a.m., 2 nights ago. Brad walked to the cot where Grandpa lay sleeping. He knelt down. The microphone picked up his whisper, magnified now to a terrifying volume. "Just die already, old man. I do not have time for this." The crowd watched in horror as Brad raised the needle, aiming for the arm of the sleeping man. Then the siren from the video blasted, causing the guests to jump. The video ended on a freeze frame of Brad's terrified face, illuminated by the flashlight, the syringe falling from his hand. The lights in the room seemed to get brighter, exposing every flaw, every bead of sweat on the faces of my family. It was over. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Then the murmurs started, a low rumble of shock and disgust. People began to back away from my parents as if their greed was contagious. "Did you see that? That was a syringe. He tried to kill him." My mother Vanessa looked at the crowd. She saw her social standing crumbling to dust. She saw the charity galas, the luncheons, the respect she craved evaporating. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She grabbed her forehead, let out a dramatic moan, and collapsed to the floor in a heap of silk and diamonds. "Vanessa," my father shouted, kneeling beside her. but his eyes were darting around looking for an exit. Brad, however, did not faint. He stood frozen near the fireplace, his face a mask of pure animalistic fury. He looked at the screen where his crime was frozen in time. Then he looked at me standing by the laptop. He realized who had done this. He realized that the quiet girl in the corner had just destroyed his life. "You," Brad roared. He lunged. He moved with a speed I did not expect, jumping over a coffee table, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He was charging toward the audiovisual cart toward me. "You little bleep, I will kill you!" Brad screamed, reaching into his jacket pocket. Guests screamed and scattered. He was going to smash the laptop. He was going to smash me. He wanted to destroy the evidence even though thousands of eyes had already seen it. I did not move. I did not flinch. I watched him come. Just as he reached the stage, just as his hand raised to strike, the lights in the entire house cut out. Click. Total darkness swallowed the room. The music stopped. The murmurs turned into frightened cries. Brad skidded to a halt, confused by the sudden blindness. For 3 seconds there was chaos. Then a sound cut through the darkness. The mechanical hum of a heavy motor. Whirr. A single spotlight beam cut through the blackness from the library doorway. It was blindingly bright, aimed directly at the center of the room where my father and Brad stood trembling. The light did not come from a stage lamp. It came from the high-powered headlight of an electric wheelchair. And sitting in the beam of light, illuminated like an avenging angel in a midnight blue tuxedo, sat Elijah Vance. He was not dead. He was not in the basement. He was here, and he looked ready to pass judgment. The beam of light cut through the darkness like a judgment from above, pinning my father and Brad in its blinding glare. The hum of the electric motor grew louder, a steady mechanical rhythm that sounded like a tank rolling into battle. From the shadows of the library doorway, my grandfather emerged. He was not the frail invalid hidden in the basement. He was a king returning to reclaim his throne. He sat upright in his heavy-duty wheelchair, wearing the midnight blue tuxedo that had been tailored on Savile Row 30 years ago. His silver hair was combed back perfectly, and his face, freshly shaven, was set in a mask of granite-hard determination. Flanking him on either side were 2 figures that spelled the end of my family's delusion. On his left was Marcus Sterling, holding a thick leather briefcase. On his right was Sheriff Henderson, a man whose presence in full uniform, with his hand resting on his service weapon, sucked the remaining air out of the room. The silence that descended on the ballroom was absolute. The guests were frozen, their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths. My mother was still on the floor, having forgotten to continue her fake faint in the face of this resurrection. My father Darnell looked like he was seeing a ghost. His mouth hung open, and his hands shook so violently that his signet ring rattled against his cufflinks. Grandpa stopped the wheelchair in the center of the room, just a few feet from the stage where Darnell had been pronouncing him dead. He reached into his lapel pocket and pulled out a small wireless microphone. He clicked it on. The feedback squeal made everyone jump, but Grandpa did not flinch. "Darnell," he said. His voice was not the weak rasp of a stroke victim. It was deep, resonant, and amplified by the speakers filling every corner of the house. "I am not dead yet, so who exactly are you dividing my assets to?" My father made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a choke. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Oh my God, Dad, we were told." "Who told you?" Grandpa interrupted, his voice booming. "Did the doctors tell you?" "No, because you never called them." "Did the nurses tell you?" "No, because you fired them. You told yourself, Darnell. You told yourself I was dead because it was convenient for your bank account." Darnell looked around the room, seeking an ally, but finding only accusatory stares. He looked at the screen where the video of his forgery was still frozen. He looked at his wife, who was now sitting up, clutching her pearls, looking like a cornered rat. "We were trying to protect the legacy," Darnell stammered, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "The business, Dad. It needs strong leadership. We saw you declining, and we just wanted to make sure everything was secure. We did this for you. For me, Grandpa laughed a dry, harsh sound that chilled my blood. You forged my signature for me. You left me in a freezing basement with a bowl of oatmeal for me. Do not insult my intelligence, Darnell. You did this because you are a failure who cannot stand on his own 2 feet. Grandpa turned his gaze to Brad. Brad had not moved. He was standing near the overturned hors d'oeuvres tray, his chest still stained red with the wine I had thrown at him. He looked wild. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that his gamble had failed catastrophically. And you, Grandpa, said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. The son-in-law. The man I welcomed into my home. The man who just tried to smash my granddaughter's computer because he did not like the movie she was playing. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He took a step back, looking for an exit, but the sheriff stepped forward, blocking the path to the hallway. It is a misunderstanding, Brad blurted out. His voice was high-pitched and frantic. That video is misleading. I was not trying to kill you, Elijah. I swear. The guests murmured again. The image of the syringe was burned into everyone's mind. Misleading, Grandpa asked, raising an eyebrow. You crept into my room at 2 a.m. with a syringe full of morphine. You said just die already. How exactly is that open to interpretation? I was trying to help. Brad lied, his eyes darting around the room, desperate to find a lie that would stick. It was vitamins, B12 shots. I saw you looked pale down there. I wanted to give you a boost. I said those things because I was frustrated that you wouldn't wake up to take your medicine. Vitamins, I said, speaking up for the first time. I walked out from behind the audiovisual cart. I pulled the Ziploc bag from my pocket, the one containing the syringe I had recovered. I held it up for the room to see. Since when do vitamins look like clear liquid morphine? I asked, my voice cutting through his lies. And since when do we administer vitamins in the dead of night while wearing gloves to avoid fingerprints? Brad stared at the bag. He knew I had him. He knew I had kept the evidence. You little witch, he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You set me up. You planted that. She is the crazy one. She has been plotting against us from the start. That is enough. Sheriff Henderson barked, stepping into the light. The sheriff was a large man who had known my grandfather for 20 years. He looked at Brad with pure disgust. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click was the loudest sound in the room. Bradford Miller, the sheriff announced, walking toward him. You are under arrest. Arrest! Brad shrieked, backing away until he hit the fireplace mantel. For what? I did nothing. You cannot arrest me on the word of a senile old man and a jealous sister. I am arresting you for attempted murder in the 1st degree, the sheriff said, grabbing Brad's wrist and spinning him around. And thanks to the video evidence provided by Ms. Jasmine Vance, we are also adding conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse to the list. The handcuffs snapped shut. Click, click. The sound was final. It was the sound of justice arriving late but heavy. Brad struggled uselessly against the sheriff's grip. Darnell, do something, he yelled at my father. Tell them we had a plan. You agreed to it. My father went pale. He frantically shook his head, distancing himself from his partner in crime. I don't know what he is talking about. I knew nothing about the morphine. That was all him. You coward, Brad screamed as the sheriff dragged him toward the door. You signed the papers. You wanted the money just as much as I did. The guests parted like the Red Sea to let the sheriff and the prisoner pass. Brad was still screaming profanities as he was hauled out into the snowy night. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser reflected through the front windows, casting a chaotic strobe light over the ruined party. When the door slammed shut, the room fell silent again. All eyes turned back to Grandpa. He looked at my father, who was now standing alone, trembling in his tuxedo. You are willing to sacrifice him to save yourself, Grandpa said quietly. But who is going to save you, Darnell? Dad, please. Darnell fell to his knees, weeping openly now. I am your son. I made a mistake. I was weak. Brad manipulated me. He told me we were going to lose the house. I just wanted to save our home. Grandpa looked at him with sadness, not anger. And that is the tragedy, Darnell. You wanted to save the house so badly that you destroyed the family that lived in it. Grandpa gestured to Sterling. Sterling stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the amendment we had drafted. This is not your home anymore, Sterling announced, his voice crisp and professional. As of 5 minutes ago, when Mr. Vance signed this document electronically, the ownership of this property and all associated assets has been transferred. Transferred to who? My mother, Vanessa asked from the floor, her voice trembling. Sterling looked at me. To the new sole trustee of the Elijah Vance estate, Sterling said. Ms. Jasmine Vance. My father looked at me. My mother looked at me. Chantel, who had been cowering in the corner this whole time, looked at me. They saw the girl they had ignored, the girl they had mocked, the girl they had slapped. And they realized that I now owned the roof over their heads. I walked over to Grandpa. I put my hand on his shoulder. He covered my hand with his, giving it a squeeze of victory. I looked at the crowd of stunned socialites. The party is over, I said, my voice calm and authoritative. Please go home. My grandfather needs to rest, and my family has some packing to do. As the guests began to scramble for their coats, murmuring and casting pitying glances at my parents, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The storm outside had passed. The storm inside was just beginning. But for the first time in my life, I was not just a spectator. I was the one holding the keys. The silence in the ballroom was broken by the sound of my father's voice cracking under the weight of his own entitlement. He stood in the center of the room, trembling in his tuxedo, looking small and pathetic against the backdrop of the empire he thought he had stolen. You cannot do this! Darnell screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. I am your son. I am your only son. You cannot just cut me out. That is illegal. I have rights. I have an expectation of inheritance. He looked around the room, seeking validation from the few remaining guests who were too fascinated by the train wreck to leave. Tell him, Darnell pleaded, pointing at a judge who was standing near the door. Tell him he cannot just disinherit his own flesh and blood because of a misunderstanding. Grandpa Elijah did not speak. He simply gestured to Marcus Sterling. The lawyer stepped forward, adjusting his glasses and opening the leather folder he had been guarding all night. Actually, Mr. Vance Sterling said, his voice calm and projecting clearly to the back of the room. There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of how your father's assets are structured. You see, you have been operating under the assumption that Elijah Vance owns this house and these accounts personally. Darnell blinked, confused. Of course he does. He built it. Incorrect, Sterling corrected him. 30 years ago, Elijah transferred all his assets into the Elijah Vance Revocable Living Trust. The trust owns the house. The trust owns the investment portfolio. The trust owns the company. Elijah is merely the grantor and the primary trustee. So what? Darnell spat. I am the beneficiary. It says so in the will. Sterling turned a page in the document, the sound crisp in the silent room. That brings us to the amendment signed 5 minutes ago, Sterling continued. But even before that, the original trust document contained a specific provision. Clause 4, Section B. We call it the bad boy clause in the legal world. He looked up at Darnell over the rim of his glasses. It states that any beneficiary who commits a crime against the grantor or engages in conduct involving moral turpitude, including but not limited to fraud, theft, or neglect, automatically forfeits their entire interest in the trust. Sterling held up the tablet displaying the video of Darnell forging the signature. Forgery is a felony, Darnell. Conspiracy to commit murder by neglect is a felony. By your own actions, you triggered the forfeiture clause. You did not just lose the inheritance tonight. You lost it the moment you picked up that pen to fake your father's name. Darnell staggered back as if he had been punched. But, but I have debts, he whispered, his arrogance evaporating into pure terror. I have lifestyle costs, the mortgage on the vacation home, the lease on the Porsche, the boat. Grandpa Elijah leaned forward into the microphone. Let us talk about those debts, Darnell. Grandpa said, his voice deep and rumbling. You never qualified for those loans on your own, did you? Your credit score is abysmal. You got them because I co-signed. I acted as the guarantor for your entire life. Darnell went pale. He knew what was coming. Every loan you have is backed by my collateral, Grandpa explained mercilessly. But the guarantee agreement has a clause too. It says that if the guarantor determines the borrower is acting irresponsibly or criminally, the guarantee can be withdrawn immediately. Grandpa pulled a sleek black phone from his pocket and pressed a single button. I just sent the withdrawal notice to the bank, Grandpa said. And since you cannot cover the collateral yourself, the bank has triggered the default clauses. As if on cue, a chime sounded from Darnell's pocket. Then another. Then a cascade of notifications. Darnell pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He stared at the screen, his eyes widening in horror. It is the bank, he whispered. They are freezing my accounts. They are recalling the loans. They are seizing the assets. He looked up at Grandpa, tears streaming down his face. Dad, they are taking everything. The condo, the cars, even my checking account. I will be bankrupt by morning. Grandpa looked at him with eyes that were tired but dry. You wanted to be a self-made man, Darnell, Grandpa said. Well, now is your chance. You are starting from zero. Just like I did. Except I had honor. You have nothing. Darnell dropped the phone. It hit the expensive rug with a dull thud. He fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. It was the sound of a man watching his entire identity dissolve. He was not Darnell Vance, the wealthy heir, anymore. He was just a middle-aged man with a criminal record and empty pockets. The room watched in stunned silence. The financial execution was complete. It was cleaner than a guillotine, but far more painful. But the night was not over. The front door opened and the sheriff returned. He was not alone. Two deputies were dragging a screaming Brad back toward the entrance, but not to bring him inside. They were clearing the path. Chantel, who had been hiding behind a potted palm tree, suddenly found her voice. She ran toward the door, her heels clacking on the marble. Brad, she screamed. Brad, wait! Where are you taking him? Brad twisted in the grip of the deputies. His face was twisted with hate. He looked at his wife not with love, but with pure venom. Shut up, you idiot! Brad shouted, spitting on the floor. This is your fault! My fault! Chantel stopped, shocked. How is this my fault? Because you and your stupid family couldn't kill one old man properly, Brad yelled, his voice echoing through the open door. I told you we needed to be aggressive, but no, you wanted to go on a cruise. You wanted to buy handbags. You useless parasite. I should have left you years ago. Chantel stood frozen. The man she worshipped, the man she had conspired with, was throwing her to the wolves to save his own ego. You don't mean that, Chantel sobbed. I mean every word, Brad sneered, as the deputies shoved him into the back of the squad car. I only married you for the money, Chantel, and now that the money is gone, you are nothing to me. The door of the police car slammed shut, ending their marriage as abruptly as it had begun. Chantel collapsed on the front steps, wailing into the cold night air. Inside the house, Grandpa turned his wheelchair to face my parents. Darnell was still on his knees. Vanessa was standing next to him, clutching her pearls, looking around for something, anything to salvage. Get out, Grandpa said. The command was simple, but it carried the weight of finality. Dad, Darnell whimpered. Please, it is snowing. Where will we go? I do not care, Grandpa said. You have friends. You have social standing. Go ask the people you were trying to impress tonight for a place to sleep. See how many of them open their doors when they realize you are broke. Vanessa's eyes darted to the coat check room. My coat, she said, her voice shrill. "I need my mink coat. It is freezing out there." She started to rush toward the closet where the expensive furs were stored. I stepped in front of her, blocking her path. I stood tall, my arms crossed over my chest. "No, Mom," I said. "Excuse me." Vanessa snapped, her old arrogance flaring up for a second. "That is my coat. It cost $12,000. It was bought with the company credit card," I said, my voice cool. "Which means it belongs to the company. And since the company is now part of the trust, that coat belongs to me." "You cannot be serious," Vanessa shrieked. "You would send your own mother out into a blizzard without a coat." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had packed a funeral dress for her father while leaving him to freeze. "I am not heartless, Mom," I said. I reached behind me. On the bench by the door sat a pile of dirty laundry I had brought up from the basement. I pulled out a thin gray blanket. It was stained with oatmeal and smelled of mildew. It was the same blanket she had left on Grandpa's cot. "Here," I said, tossing it to her. She caught it instinctively. She looked down at the rag in her hands in horror. "This is filthy," she gasped. "It is warm enough," I said, echoing the words she had used on the cruise ship. "It kept Grandpa alive for 10 days. It should be good enough to get you to a motel." Vanessa looked at me with pure hatred, but she saw the resolve in my eyes. She saw the sheriff standing behind me. She saw that she had lost. She wrapped the dirty blanket around her shoulders, her diamonds clashing pathetically with the gray wool. She grabbed Darnell by the collar and hauled him to his feet. "Come on," she hissed at him. "We are leaving." They walked toward the door. Chantel was still sitting on the steps crying. They pulled her up, dragging her along like baggage. Grandpa rolled his wheelchair to the threshold. He watched them stumble down the steps into the snow. The wind was howling now, whipping the snow around them in a blinding vortex. They looked small. They looked cold. "And do not come back," Grandpa called out over the wind. "The locks will be changed by morning, and the restraining order is already filed." Darnell turned back once. He looked at the warm, glowing house. He looked at the father he had betrayed and the daughter he had underestimated. "I am sorry," he mouthed. Grandpa did not answer. He pressed the button on the remote control. The heavy oak door swung shut. Boom! The sound was like a gavel striking a sounding block. The lock clicked into place. Silence returned to the house. The warmth of the heater wrapped around us. The smell of the expensive food they had not eaten filled the air. I turned to Grandpa. He was slumped slightly in his chair, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving him exhausted. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He looked at the closed door. Then he looked at me. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I am tired, Jasmine," he whispered. "But I am warm." I took his hand. It was warm. I pushed his wheelchair toward the living room, toward the fire that was crackling in the hearth. "Let us get some hot cocoa," I said, "and then we can start planning the future." The house was empty of the parasites. The quiet was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Outside, the storm raged, burying the tracks of the people who used to be my family. But inside, we were safe. We were together. And for the first time in a long time, the Vance legacy was in the hands of someone who actually gave a damn. The heavy oak door was locked, and for the first time in 10 days, the silence inside the house did not feel empty. It felt heavy with peace. The frantic energy of the party had evaporated, leaving behind the smell of wood smoke and the faint, lingering scent of expensive perfume from guests who would never return. I walked around the first floor, systematically turning off the crystal chandeliers my mother had loved so much. I did not need their artificial glare. I wanted the real warmth of the fire. I went into the kitchen, which was still cluttered with the remnants of the catering service. Trays of half-eaten salmon and abandoned wineglasses covered the counters, but I ignored them. I reached into the back of the pantry, past the imported truffles and the vintage wines, and found a dented tin of cocoa powder. It was the cheap kind, the kind Grandpa used to make for me when I came in from sledding as a child. I heated milk on the stove, watching it bubble and steam. The simple domestic act felt like a ritual. It was a reclaiming of the space. This was not a venue for social climbers anymore. It was a home. I poured the hot chocolate into 2 mugs. I did not use the fine china. I used his favorite ceramic mug, the one with the chipped rim and the faded print that read, "World's Greatest Grandpa." I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet chocolate scent. It smelled like safety. I carried the mugs into the living room. Grandpa Elijah had moved from his wheelchair to the large leather armchair by the hearth. He looked small in the massive chair, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his bow tie undone, hanging loose around his neck. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving him looking exhausted, but his eyes were bright. They reflected the dancing flames of the fireplace. "Here, Grandpa," I said, placing the mug in his hands. He took it, wrapping his long fingers around the warm ceramic. He closed his eyes and took a sip, letting out a long sigh of contentment. "Better than champagne," he murmured. "Much better," I agreed, sitting on the rug at his feet, just like I used to do when I was a little girl listening to his stories. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind howl outside. It was a ferocious sound, a reminder of the storm that was burying Boston in white. But in here, the fire crackled and popped a defiant rhythm against the cold. Lawyer Sterling had left quietly a few minutes after the police took Brad away. He had left a thick leather binder on the coffee table. It sat there heavy and black, containing the deeds to the house, the access codes to the bank accounts, and the keys to the company. It was the crown jewels of the Vance empire. And it was sitting next to a pile of old magazines. Grandpa nodded toward the binder. "Do you know what is in there, Jasmine?" he asked, his voice soft but serious. "Everything," I said. "The money, the properties, the legacy." He shook his head slowly. "No, that is just paperwork. What is in there is power." He leaned forward, looking down at me with an intensity that made me straighten my spine. "For 50 years I thought the purpose of that binder was to build something for my family," he said. "I thought if I filled it with enough assets, if I made the numbers big enough, it would guarantee happiness. I thought it would buy loyalty." He took another sip of cocoa, his gaze drifting to the empty spot where Darnell had knelt begging. "I was wrong," he admitted. "Money does not buy loyalty, Jasmine. It only rents it. And the moment the rent is due, the tenants turn on you." I looked at the fire, thinking about my mother shivering in the dirty blanket. I thought about Chantel crying on the steps, not for her husband but for her lost lifestyle. "I felt cruel tonight, Grandpa," I confessed quietly. "When I closed that door, when I saw them standing in the snow, it felt cold. Am I becoming like them?" Grandpa reached out and placed his hand on my head. His palm was rough, warm, and steady. "No, Jasmine," he said firmly. "Never think that. Cruelty is hurting someone for your own gain. What you did tonight was justice. And justice is often cold because it has to be hard." He pointed a finger at the binder. "You are the trustee now. You control the foundation. You control the scholarships. You control the housing projects. That power is a tool." In Darnell's hands, it was a weapon to hurt people, to exclude people, to make himself feel big. In your hands, it can be a shield. He looked me in the eye. "You do not have to be Tan Yun to exist in this world, Jas. You do not have to be mean, but you do have to be strong. You need power not to rule over people, but to protect the good people from the bad ones. You need to be the gatekeeper." I looked at the binder. I thought about the tenants in Grandpa's buildings who needed repairs. I thought about the charities that my mother had ignored because they were not fashionable. I thought about the potential to do good, real good, not just performative charity. "I understand, Grandpa," I said. "I will protect it." "I know you will." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a smile of pure, unburdened joy. "That is why I waited. That is why I fought the sleep in that cold basement. I had to make sure the torch was passed to the only person who wouldn't use it to burn the house down. He finished his cocoa and set the mug down. "I am going to sleep, Jasmine," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "And tomorrow, I'm going to wake up in my own bed. And I am going to eat a breakfast that isn't oatmeal." I stood up and kissed his forehead. "Good night, Grandpa. I will see you in the morning." I watched him maneuver his wheelchair toward the hallway, toward the master suite that was finally his again. I waited until I heard his door close. I was alone. I walked to the large bay window at the front of the house. I pulled back the heavy velvet curtain and looked out. The storm was still raging, but the violence had gone out of it. Now, it just looked beautiful. The streetlights cast a soft orange glow on the falling snow, turning the flakes into millions of descending diamonds. The tire tracks of the police cruiser were already filling in. The footprints where my parents had stumbled away were being erased by the fresh white powder. The world was being washed clean. I thought about my apartment in Chicago, the small life I had built there. I realized I would not be going back. My life was here now. There was a mess to clean up. There were lawyers to call, accounts to audit, and a reputation to rebuild. It would be hard work. There would be scandals and whispers in court cases. Brad would fight, Darnell would beg. But as I watched the snowfall covering the scars of the night, I felt a sensation I had not recognized in a long time. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. It was not the adrenaline of revenge. It was not the heat of anger. It was peace. I touched the cold glass. The reflection stared back at me. I did not look like the scared girl who had arrived 10 days ago. I did not look like the victim. I looked like Jasmine Vance, the owner of the house on Beacon Hill. I let the curtain fall back into place, shutting out the night. I turned back to the warm, glowing room. The fire was dying down to embers, but that was okay. I knew how to build it back up. I knew how to keep it burning. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the heavy black binder. It felt solid in my hands. "Let us get to work," I whispered to the empty room. I turned off the last lamp and walked up the stairs into the darkness. But I was not afraid of the dark anymore. I was the one holding the light. This story reminds us that true legacy is never defined by bank accounts but by character. Darnell and Brad believed power came from status and manipulation, but they learned the hard way that money can rent loyalty, yet it can never buy love. Jasmine's journey proves that real strength lies in protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. When the storms of life hit, greed will always leave you out in the cold, while integrity becomes the only shelter that truly stands. If you believe justice was served today, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members to protect someone you love? I'd love to read your story in the comments below.